As I think about some of the most pressing issues on marketers in the biopharma sector, really not limited to just marketing people, but few things come to mind, right? It's the rise of personalized medicine, drug affordability, the digitization of the entire industry. That's both on the drug development side as well as in marketing. Constantly evolving regulatory landscape, and trust and transparency. So today, we're going to talk about the trust and transparency issue. It's never been more important, especially as we navigate this post-pandemic era. Trust experienced some pretty significant highs and lows over the past few years. If you take a brief walk down memory lane, go back a few years into the early days of the pandemic, trust soared. Breakthroughs were celebrated. Hope was on the horizon. There's a particular study that's put out every year. It's the Edelman Trust Barometer, and people trusted the pharmaceutical industry like never before. Companies like Pfizer and Moderna literally made it into top 10 favorite companies in the US on one of those lists. And that just doesn't typically happen when it comes to pharmaceutical companies. But the dust has settled. Obviously, a lot of questions have arose over the past couple of years, and the trust has waned. And transparency is honestly the only way that we rebuild it. It's about building trust with consumers, patients, aligning with ethical practices, especially in light of the whole opioid crisis over the past many years, and companies like Purdue Pharma. And obviously fulfilling regulatory compliance, which might sound like kind of duh, but not always that obvious. I mean, I scour the headlines and read a lot of news every week, and there's a lot of major companies that are being dealt regulatory blows practically every week. So not everybody is constantly in compliance, and each time a company steps out of those bounds, and that makes a headline, that does significant things to the public's trust. So what are some of the key areas that are demanding the most transparency? I think first and foremost, over and above everything else, is always going to be safety and efficacy. What is in the medicine? We know a lot of people had valid questions about this during the rapid development of the COVID vaccines. How great were the drug companies and the public health institutions at communicating that? I wouldn't say too great. But people deserve to know the answer to these essential questions, including how were the drugs tested? I think that was, one of the positives that I think came out of the whole pandemic was a lot more light shined on the clinical trial process, and those types of terms becoming a regular part of the public's vocabulary. But also, another point is the cost of drug development. I don't think most people know that it costs upwards of $2.3 billion and takes on average 10 to 15 years to take a drug from concept to launch. That should be communicated. When people are wondering why drugs cost as much as they do, I think it's important that they know the cost of R&D and production and marketing costs, pricing strategies. How are prices determined? People should get a clear breakdown of that, help the public understand what goes into that. And we all know there are challenges in balancing full transparency. It's not all smooth sailing. You got to balance protecting your IP. You got to think about your competition. You got to think about regulatory, and you've got to do all this with finesse. It's a challenge, but we've got to do it head on. So what's the path forward? It involves clear communication, collaborating with regulators, teaming up with patient advocacy groups. It's about being open, accountable, and transparent, showing our commitment to those we serve, meaning patients, HCPs, investors, employees, partners, the public. Transparency is the linchpin for rebuilding trust in this post-pandemic era. And there's a lot of tactics. I wrote about them recently in a blog post, and I'm going to include the link to that in the post along with this video.